The night everything cracked open, I sat alone at a restaurant table meant for celebration, staring at the untouched slice of cake while my phone lit up with a truth that nearly tore the floor from beneath me. My life, my savings, my trust, they were being spent somewhere thousands of miles away, enjoyed by the two people I never imagined would betray me. That moment was not just painful, it was the kind of hurt that reshapes a life, the kind that forces you to confront what you tried so hard not to see. And that is where this story truly begins. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you have not already, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let us begin. My name is Elaine Morrison, and at 67 years old, I have learned that a house can feel both full and empty at the very same time. My home in Asheville, North Carolina, has stood for nearly half a century, its cedar beams and wide mountain-facing windows carrying the memory of a life I once lived with my husband. After he passed 8 years ago, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Some mornings it feels too quiet, as if even the walls are holding their breath, waiting for a familiar voice that never returns. I start each day the same way. I brew a cup of Earl Grey tea, step onto the small porch that overlooks the Blue Ridge Mountains, and watch the light stretch across the ridges like a soft blanket. There is peace in that view, but also an ache, the kind that lingers behind the ribs. I tend to the little garden my husband planted years ago. The chrysanthemums bloom faithfully each autumn, stubborn and bright, as if determined to remind me that life goes on whether or not we are ready. Inside, shelves filled with pottery catch the morning light. Some are new pieces I have made for loyal customers who still visit my now-closed shop. Others are cracked bowls and uneven vases I kept because my husband once said, "Imperfections make an object human." I run my fingers over them often, the way one touches a scar not from pain but for grounding. My son, Adam Morrison, does not visit often. At 38, he has built a busy life far from Asheville. His wife, Sophie, is a lifestyle content creator who documents every sparkling brunch and glossy outfit online. I do not fully understand her world, but I try not to judge. Parenthood, at my age, seems to be a long exercise in accepting distance. I still hold warmth and hope for both of them, even when the silence grows heavy. For my 68th birthday, I made a reservation at the Ridgeview Lodge, a rustic restaurant my family used to love. The wooden interior, the gentle music, the panoramic view over the valley, it all made celebrations feel intimate and safe. I laid out a blue linen dress the night before, brushed my hair with more care than usual, and dusted on a bit of rose-colored lipstick. I was not expecting a grand event, only a meal shared with my son. That would have been enough. In the afternoon, the phone rang. Adam's voice was brisk, as if carried by a breeze that did not have time to settle. He said they had received a sudden opportunity to travel to Scandinavia and would not be able to join me for dinner. His tone was polite, even apologetic, yet something in his words felt distant, as though the decision had been made long before he called. I told him I understood. After the call ended, the house felt noticeably still. I kept the dinner reservation anyway. I arranged a bouquet of fresh flowers in a handmade vase, set the embroidered table runner my husband once admired, and tried to convince myself that celebrating alone did not have to feel like a failure. Yet my eyes kept drifting to the empty chair across from mine, the one Adam used to sit in when he was small. That chair, now motionless and untouched, carried more weight than any spoken apology. As the evening settled and the mountain light dimmed, I felt an unfamiliar pull in my chest. Not anger, not sorrow, something quieter, sharper, a sense that this birthday, marked by absence, was the beginning of a shift. I did not yet understand the path ahead, but I felt its presence the way one senses a storm before the clouds gather. I lifted my cup of tea, gazed out at the blue-hued mountains, and whispered to myself that I was fine. But deep down, I knew something in my life had just tilted. If you are still watching and this moment hits you harder than you expected, comment number 1 below, so I know you are with me. Now, let us move on to Chapter 2. Things are about to shift. The morning after my lonely birthday dinner felt unusually still, as if the house itself was pausing to study me. I moved slowly through the kitchen, preparing my usual cup of Earl Grey tea, but the warmth of the mug did not ease the unsettled feeling lodged beneath my ribs. There are moments in life when intuition whispers before reason can speak. And that morning, something in me knew I needed to pay attention. The sun drifted through the curtains in a pale, cool light, casting long shadows over my pottery shelf. Even the familiar shapes of bowls and vases seemed to signal that something was out of place. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my phone, intending to read the birthday messages I had ignored the night before. As I scrolled, a new image pulsed at the top of the screen. It was a story posted by my daughter-in-law, Sophie. There she was, perfectly styled, reclining in a wide leather seat, the cabin lights glowing softly around her. A flute of champagne sparkled in her hand. Next to her, Adam leaned back with a relaxed smile I had not seen in years. The caption read something about embracing Scandinavian adventures and celebrating life. Another clip followed of them wheeling expensive luggage across the marble lobby of Hotel d'Angleterre in Copenhagen. The images struck me like cold water. Adam had said the trip was sudden, something tied loosely to work. Nothing about what I was seeing resembled urgency or obligation. I remembered the shaky tone of his apology during the call the night before and the way he had brushed off my questions. I also remembered the $6,500 he had borrowed for a roof repair only a few weeks earlier. There was a sharp dissonance between the hardship he described and the luxury glowing across their screens. I set the phone down, but the unease followed me as I opened my laptop. A new email blinked in my inbox. It was from my bank, Blue Ridge Federal. The subject line read, "Your automatic transfer has been scheduled." My heart tightened. I had never set up automatic transfers. I clicked the message twice, as if the meaning might change, but the wording remained clear and clinical. The email did not specify the amount or the receiving account. It was simply a confirmation. For a moment, I wondered if I had forgotten a payment or agreed to something during a busy day, but the doubt dissolved quickly. I lived an orderly life. Every bill was written in a small spiral notebook. I never approved anything without noting it. The realization settled over me in a cold, steady wave. Something might be happening without my consent. I opened my online banking portal, but the interface had grown complicated since Adam helped me switch accounts last year. Numbers blurred together as I searched for clues. I noticed a few transactions that seemed unfamiliar, but I could not tell if they were legitimate or mistakes. The uncertainty pressed against me until I closed the laptop entirely. I walked through the living room, stopping in front of the mantel where a framed photograph of my family rested. Adam was 10 in that picture, grinning with 2 missing teeth, holding a lopsided clay bowl he had made during one of my pottery workshops. I touched the frame and felt a sadness that was both old and new. Trust is something built slowly but broken in an instant, and I felt a crack forming before I even understood the cause. By midday, I decided I could not ignore the signs. I grabbed my keys from the hook near the door and inhaled deeply. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe the email was routine. Maybe the story posts were unrelated. Yet beneath all those maybes was a quieter truth. I needed to know. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me, and headed toward my car with a heart that already suspected what my mind refused to say aloud. If you are still watching and feeling the tension building, comment number 2 below to show you are following every clue. Now, let us continue to Chapter 3, where the first real crack appears. I drove into downtown Branchville late that morning with a knot forming in my stomach, the kind that felt as if it carried its own pulse. The town looked unchanged, the same quiet storefronts and trimmed lawns, the same early sunlight brushing over the red brick sidewalks. Yet something inside me insisted that nothing about my life was as steady as the scenery suggested. The uneasy feeling from last night had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened into something urgent, a sense that I was standing on the edge of a truth I had not asked for but could no longer avoid. I kept replaying Adam's rushed call, the background noise, the abrupt cancellation of our dinner, and the hollow space it left in my chest. I reminded myself that I was simply checking my accounts for peace of mind, but even that small reassurance rang false. Blue Ridge Federal Bank was cool and brightly lit, the air scented with the familiar mix of paper and disinfectant. I had banked here for more than 20 years, long enough that several employees greeted me by name. Today, however, I felt strangely out of place, as though I had stepped into a version of my life where I no longer understood the rules. Melissa, a young advisor with kind eyes, recognized me at once and motioned me toward a private consultation room. I followed her inside, clutching my handbag a little too tightly. The walls were lined with framed certificates, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning only amplified the tension rising in my chest. I explained that I had received some unusual notifications and wanted to review my accounts. My voice sounded steady, but my hands rested stiffly on the table. Melissa began typing, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly as she navigated through the system. She turned her monitor slightly, asking careful questions about an account I had never heard of. The words secondary account and family-supported transactions struck the table like heavy stones. She scrolled further, revealing months of transfers labeled with vague notes, some marked with the phrase, "Approved by Adam." My breath thinned as though the room had suddenly shrunk. When Melissa opened the authorization file, the sight of my own name listed beside Adam's as a co-manager made my pulse stumble. She printed the documents and slid them toward me with quiet caution. There, on the page, was my signature. It was perfect, indistinguishable from the one I had written thousands of times, yet I had never signed these forms. A note below the signature stated that a family representative had been present during the authorization. A memory surfaced of Adam standing beside my desk months earlier, asking me to log in so he could help update my computer settings. I had not hesitated. I had not imagined he might guide me through something more than a routine adjustment. My throat tightened as Melissa continued her review, revealing additional transfers, a newly opened credit card under my name, and a pending inquiry related to a second mortgage connected to my house. The total amount siphoned away exceeded $30,000. When I stepped outside the bank, the sky had dimmed, clouds gathering despite the forecast for clear weather. I clutched the packet of documents against my chest, feeling exposed and strangely hollow. The betrayal settled slowly, like cold water filling a sinking boat. Adam was my son. Sophie was my daughter-in-law. I had believed that love alone ensured trust. Standing beside my car, I felt the wind tug at my jacket, and I understood with painful clarity that I had crossed into a new reality. What I had discovered today was only the beginning. I inhaled, steadying myself, and reached for my phone with the growing certainty that I would need help to face whatever came next. If you are still watching and sense the shock settling in, comment number 3 below so I know you are right here with me. Now, let us head into Chapter 4, where the struggle begins. When I returned home from the bank, the air inside the house felt strangely heavier, as though it had absorbed the shock still pulsing through my chest. The rooms that had always offered comfort and familiarity now seemed unsettled, filled with quiet echoes of everything I had just learned. I set the stack of papers from Blue Ridge Federal Bank on the dining table, spreading them out beneath the soft afternoon light. The sun slipped through the tall windows, illuminating every printed number, every authorization line, every betrayal disguised as routine account activity. My hands trembled, but I pressed my palms against the table until they steadied. Falling apart was not an option. Not now. I reached for my phone and called Grace. The moment she heard my voice, her tone shifted from cheerful greeting to alert concern. I explained what the banker had shown me, the extra account, the transfers, the forged authorization. She listened without interrupting, letting the weight of it settle. When she finally spoke, her voice held a firm clarity that I desperately needed. She guided me through each step I needed to take next, pull every statement from the past year, log into the investment accounts, check for new credit lines, verify whether any property-related loans had been initiated without my consent. Her calm helped anchor me, even as shame prickled at my skin. I knew she was right. I had been too trusting, blinded by maternal instinct. Once the call ended, I opened my laptop and logged into the investment account my late husband had carefully built over decades. The balance hit me like a blow. Several large withdrawals had been made within the last 3 months, each one chipping away at the security I had believed was untouched. Line after line revealed purchases and payments that had nothing to do with me. The transactions painted a picture I did not want to see. Hotel stays, airline charges, designer stores, and amounts that matched the timing of Adam and Sophie's recent lifestyle upgrades. My heart sank deeper as I moved on to the credit report. A luxury credit card had been opened under my name, carrying charges that spiraled far beyond anything I would ever spend. I tried calling Adam. The phone rang until it cut to voicemail. I did not leave a message, afraid my voice might betray the mixture of hurt and anger swelling in my throat. I sent a brief text asking him to call me as soon as possible. The hours crawled with no response. His silence felt louder than any explanation he could have offered. When I opened my email to search for financial notifications, a new thread caught my attention. It was a conversation between Adam and a real estate agent in Savannah. My breath stalled as I read through the enthusiastic discussion of using my house, my one irreplaceable asset, as collateral for a business venture described vaguely as a coastal mini-resort. The words blurred for a moment as realization washed over me. This was not a string of impulsive mistakes. This was a deliberate pattern, a reckless plan unfolding behind my back. The betrayal pressed down harder than before, and yet beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. I gathered every printed page into a folder, stacking them carefully even though my hands shook again. If I did nothing, the life I had built, the home I cherished, and the security I depended on in my later years could all vanish. The thought ignited a steadiness deep inside me. As evening settled over the house, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by documents and the quiet hum of determination. Tomorrow, I would contact Henry Matthews, the attorney who had once helped my husband settle estate matters. I needed guidance, and I needed it quickly. The road ahead would not be easy, but the first step had finally taken shape. I was no longer simply reacting. I was preparing to fight. If you are still watching, and the unraveling feels impossible to look away from, comment number 4 below to stay connected. Now, let us move into chapter Wagati, where everything ignites. I woke before sunrise, though I had barely slept. The house felt different that morning, as if the walls themselves sensed that something decisive was about to unfold. A gray, heavy sky hung over Branchfield, pressing its weight against the windows. I gathered the stack of documents I had organized the night before, smoothing their edges even though my hands trembled. The mixture of fear, sorrow, and determination inside me felt sharper than anything I had known in years. I realized then that the version of myself who avoided conflict, who made excuses for Adam, who trusted without question, no longer served me. I needed to move forward as someone stronger. Henry Matthews' office sat on a quiet corner near the courthouse, its brick exterior weathered but dignified. Inside, shelves of dense legal volumes lined the walls, and a framed photograph of Henry shaking hands with my late husband rested behind his desk. The sight tightened my throat. Henry greeted me with a solemn expression, sensing the gravity of the moment. As he looked through the documents, his face shifted from focused concentration to unmistakable concern. He laid out the facts with the steady precision of someone who had handled difficult cases for decades. Unauthorized transfers, forged electronic signatures, identity theft, a pending loan tied to my home, elder financial abuse. Hearing the terms aloud made everything feel brutally real, each phrase carved deeper into a place I had hoped would remain untouched. We were reviewing possible actions when my phone began to vibrate. I recognized the international number. Adam was calling from Paris. For a moment, I could not bring myself to answer, but I forced my hand toward the device. His voice came through bright and casual, layered with the distant murmur of a busy street. He offered a vague explanation about banking mistakes and miscommunications. There was a strain beneath the words, a thin thread of unease he could not hide. As I began listing the issues I had discovered, the tone on the other end tightened. He spoke faster, insisting there was nothing intentional. Then I heard Sophie's voice in the background, urging him to end the call. Something inside me hardened. I switched the phone to speaker so Henry could hear everything. The room fell silent, except for the shaky rhythm of Adam's voice and Sophie's distant interjections. They thought they were reassuring me, but their words only revealed more. At one point, Sophie muttered a phrase she should never have said. She referenced the mortgage extension they had already filed, confirming without hesitation, a step they had never mentioned to me. A chill ran through my entire body. It was no longer possible to tell myself this was confusion or carelessness. This was deliberate. I felt the tension rise like a storm inside my chest. Adam shifted from defensive explanations to a plea that everything he did was for our family. But something in me had reached its limit. The silence I held for years cracked open. My voice emerged steady, colder than I expected, shaped by the knowledge that love could not excuse deception. Henry signaled gently that it was time to end the call. I pressed the screen, cutting the line despite the faint sound of Adam calling my name. The room grew quiet again. The absence of their voices left a hollow ache, yet beneath it came a strange clarity. Henry folded his hands and said what I already knew. This was no longer just a family dispute. It had become a legal matter. I walked to the window, watching the morning drizzle blur the view of Branchfield. The life I had known, the trust I had given so freely, could not be restored. Still, I felt a steadiness forming where fear had been. I turned back to Henry and signed the documents he prepared, the ones that would begin the process of securing my accounts and protecting my home. It was the first step toward reclaiming not only my finances, but my dignity. For a long moment after the call ended, I sat in Henry's office, unable to move. The silence in the room felt dense, almost physical, as if it carried the full weight of everything I had just heard. The betrayal, the forged authorizations, the reckless plans, The casual way my home and my savings had been treated like stepping stones for someone else's ambition, each fact pressed against me until it became difficult to breathe. Henry did not rush me. He remained seated behind his desk, hands folded, giving me space to gather myself. I could feel a subtle shift happening inside me, a recognition that I stood at a dividing line. The choices I made next would reshape not only my future, but the very nature of my family. Henry eventually leaned forward, speaking with a deliberateness that forced the room into focus. He laid out the two pathways available to me. The first was direct and uncompromising: pursue criminal charges. The evidence, he explained, was substantial: unauthorized transfers, identity theft, forged signatures, financial exploitation of an elder. The law did not waver on such matters. If I chose this route, Adam could face criminal prosecution, job loss, and the unraveling of everything he claimed to be building. Sophie, already tangled in questionable financial behavior, could undergo deeper investigation. The consequences would be severe and swift. The second path was no less serious, but allowed room for controlled resolution. It involved a civil agreement, legally binding and strictly enforced. Under such an agreement, Adam would be required to repay every dollar withdrawn from my accounts, assume full responsibility for any debts or loans tied to my home, relinquish any access to my finances, and participate in financial counseling and family therapy. Violations would trigger immediate referral to criminal authorities. It was a narrow bridge between justice and mercy, a structure strong enough to protect me, but flexible enough to leave open the possibility of reconciliation. I listened, absorbing each word as though I were learning a new language. A part of me recoiled at the idea of sentencing my own son to the harsh machinery of the criminal system. Yet another part, deeper and more wounded, questioned how far he would have gone if I had not uncovered the truth. As Henry spoke, memories rose unbidden. Adam as a small boy standing beside me at the pottery wheel, hands covered in clay, giggling as the spinning clay wobbled into odd shapes. That child felt impossibly distant from the man who had used my trust as leverage. Just as I thought I had reached some mental clarity, Henry revealed something I had not anticipated. A warning had arrived from a credit agency early that morning. If no action was taken within days, the pending mortgage extension connected to my home could be approved and released. The moment the funds moved, reversing the transaction would become far more complicated, and the house I had nurtured for decades might be placed in irreversible jeopardy. The urgency in his voice struck me harder than anything he had said before. The time for contemplation had passed. A cold, steady resolve spread through me. I knew then that I could not allow my home to be gambled away, nor could I pretend that this situation was a misunderstanding. I chose the civil agreement. It was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of protection, both of myself and of whatever remained of my relationship with Adam. If he failed to uphold the agreement, I would not hesitate to move forward with criminal charges. Henry nodded, already pulling a long form from his drawer and drafting clauses with meticulous care. I watched the pen move across the pages, shaping the boundaries I should have set years ago. As the agreement came together, I felt a strange calm replace the chaos within me. This was the shape of my decision. This was the moment I stepped into the version of myself who would not be exploited again. When I finally stepped outside, the sky above Branchfield had begun to clear. Patches of pale light filtered through the thinning clouds. I stood beside my car, the folder tucked under my arm, understanding fully that the path ahead would not be simple. Yet I knew I had chosen the right direction. What broke me had also, in some unexpected way, strengthened me. If you are still watching and the turning point left you breathless, comment number 6 below, so I know you are following this journey. Now, let us continue with Chapter 7 and watch the fallout unfold. When I returned home after meeting with Henry, the house felt heavier than it had the day before, as if it were absorbing the echo of every difficult truth I had confronted. The familiar rooms carried a muted stillness, and the quiet felt sharper, more deliberate, as though it wanted me to acknowledge how much had changed. I placed the thick folder containing the civil agreement on the kitchen table. It lay there like a silent witness to everything that had unraveled and everything I was choosing to rebuild. My body felt exhausted, not from physical effort, but from the weight of responsibility and the emotional strain of accepting what my own son had done. Over the next week, the consequences of the agreement spread outward like ripples from a stone dropped into water. Adam moved out of the upscale apartment he once flaunted on social media and into a much smaller place on the outskirts of town. His new position at work offered stability, but came with lower pay and none of the travel perks he once enjoyed. From what I gathered, the decision had been forced by his employer after internal auditors reviewed his authorization history. His voice, when he sent brief updates, sounded tight and subdued. I could feel the resentment beneath the politeness, but I had learned to let it pass through me rather than cling to it. Sophie faced her own unraveling. The lifestyle she projected online had slipped beyond her means long before the agreement, and now she could no longer hide behind curated photographs. The financial review required by the tax agency forced her to disclose inconsistencies she had ignored, and the pressure of that investigation bled into her marriage. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that nights in their home had become battlegrounds of accusation and desperation. None of this gave me satisfaction. If anything, it deepened the sorrow in my chest. But I reminded myself again and again that these were consequences of their choices, not punishments I had imposed. My own world shifted as well. I scheduled meetings with a financial advisor and began adjusting my spending to account for the losses. It was humbling to face the reality that my retirement plan needed restructuring. I cut small expenses, canceled a few luxuries I rarely used, and reviewed my accounts every week instead of once a month. The vigilance felt both empowering and exhausting. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling guilty for the hardships Adam and Sophie were enduring, even though I knew the guilt was misplaced. Love, I realized, sometimes persists even when trust has collapsed. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the tax agency addressed to me. The knot in my stomach tightened as I read that my name had appeared in documents linked to Sophie's unreported income. For a moment, fear cold as ice ran through me. It felt as though their recklessness might swallow me whole. I gathered the letter and immediately drove to Henry's office, then to a tax specialist he recommended. The relief I felt when they confirmed I bore no liability was almost overwhelming. Still, the incident revealed just how entangled Sophie's financial carelessness had become. It was another reminder of how close I had come to losing far more than money. Slowly, I began rebuilding. I created a weekly checklist to monitor every account. I joined a local women's financial group, where I found community among others who had weathered betrayal or financial manipulation. Sharing my story felt strangely strengthening, as though speaking the truth anchored me more firmly in the present. I was learning to live with boundaries, a skill I had neglected most of my adult life. Meanwhile, Adam made his first repayment on time. He sent a detailed email outlining his plan for the next month. It was a small gesture, but it glimmered faintly with sincerity. Sophie kept her distance, offering no messages or acknowledgments, and I did not push for more. Healing, if it ever came, would require time neither of us was ready for. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the trees and painted the sky with muted gold, I stood on the porch and watched the quiet world around me. I held the agreement in my hands, running my thumb along its edge. It reminded me that although the future was uncertain, I had carved out a space where I could stand steady again. I was no longer drifting. I was rebuilding, slowly and deliberately, step by step. The morning after everything seemed to collapse, I woke with a surprising sense of steadiness. It was not confidence, not yet, but a fragile clarity that felt new after weeks of turmoil. Light streamed through the kitchen window of my small house in Branchfield, turning the steam rising from my coffee into a soft ribbon that curled upward as if reaching for something better. I opened my notebook, the one I had begun keeping since the night my world shifted, and reviewed the tasks I had written in a firmer hand than usual: protect accounts, reorganize finances, rebuild boundaries. For the first time, none of the words frightened me. I began with the practical steps. One by one, I placed security freezes with all 3 major credit reporting agencies. I activated every alert available through my bank, flagging even the smallest transaction. I layered passwords with verification codes and security keys. The process was tedious, but each completed step restored something Adam had taken from me: my autonomy, my right to know and control the fate of my own life. This time, no one but me held the reins. Later that week, I met with a financial advisor who had been recommended by a neighbor, someone entirely unconnected to Adam. We spread piles of papers across her desk as she examined the damage, asking questions gently, never once letting judgment seep into her tone. Together, we built a long-term plan to stabilize my retirement income, adjust my investment strategy, and create layers of protection that would prevent anyone from ever gaining unauthorized access again. Walking out of her office, I felt lighter, as though someone had wiped a long, fogged window clear. Meanwhile, Adam had begun completing the requirements outlined in our legal agreement. I received the first reports from his financial management counselor, carefully typed, showing an earnest attempt to rebuild structure in his chaotic world. Sophie had started working at a modest yoga center in the downtown district. Their choices did not erase what they had done, but they marked the beginning of accountability, something I had never demanded before. I also forced myself not to retreat into isolation. Branchfield offered a weekly gathering for women navigating financial setbacks, and though I hesitated at first, I eventually stepped through the community center's doors. Listening to others speak of their own painful lessons eased something inside me. Sharing mine seemed to help them in return. It amazed me how many women around my age had endured similar betrayals. The honesty in that room reminded me that vulnerability could grow connection rather than fear. As the days passed, small changes accumulated. I no longer hesitated before opening bank statements. I checked my accounts without dread. I reclaimed routines I had abandoned in the chaos: morning walks, tending my neglected herb garden, and writing reflections each evening. Strength returned in small increments, subtle yet unmistakable. Near the end of the week, Adam appeared on my porch without warning. The visit was brief and awkward, filled mostly with quiet gestures rather than words, but it held a sincerity I had not seen from him in years. When he left, I realized the encounter had not reopened the wound. Instead, it marked a cautious beginning. That night, I sat on my front steps, watching the sky shift from amber to deep blue, feeling the first true sense of calm since the ordeal began. My life was no longer defined by what had been taken from me. I was building again, slowly but surely, piece by piece. If you are still watching and beginning to sense the light returning after the storm, comment number 8 below to stay with me. Now, let us move into the final chapters and see how this story finds its resolution. 1 year after everything shattered, I found myself standing on the porch of my small home in Branchfield, feeling the kind of quiet I once believed I would never recover. The chaos that had consumed my days had softened into something steadier, almost peaceful. It surprised me how naturally I moved through my routines now, no longer bracing for another disappointment or betrayal. I had rebuilt my life piece by fragile piece, and somewhere along the way, I had begun to trust myself again. Adam and Sophie had changed too, though their transformation had taken time and effort. For 12 consecutive months, their repayments arrived without delay, each transfer a quiet acknowledgement of past harm. Adam had not missed a single counseling appointment. His new job, far more modest than the position he once chased, seemed to anchor him rather than inflate him. Sophie continued teaching at a small community yoga studio, no longer burdened by the image of a lifestyle she could never actually afford. Their new apartment was tiny, humble, and entirely theirs. I could see how the simplicity steadied them. My own path had widened in unexpected ways. The support group I started, Financial Boundaries Circle, had grown beyond anything I envisioned. Dozens of women gathered each month to share their struggles, victories, and fears. Watching them rebuild confidence reminded me that healing rarely happens alone. I had become a speaker at workshops and community events, offering what insight I could to those who felt lost. For the first time in years, I felt purposeful. One evening after a group meeting, I watched members linger in the community center, exchanging stories and laughter. Their resilience moved me. It struck me that the pain Adam caused had led me into a space where I could help others reclaim their strength. Even wounds, when healed properly, could serve a greater good. Later that month, Adam and Sophie visited for a simple dinner. They brought a homemade pie, uneven and imperfect, which somehow made it more meaningful. Their faces carried humility rather than shame. Adam thanked me for choosing boundaries instead of abandonment. I told him I recognized his effort, even if trust would take more time to rebuild. When they left, I stepped onto the porch again. The branch-filled night was cool and still, carrying no weight from the past. The story that once broke me had reached its conclusion, not perfect but whole. I finally felt free to walk forward without looking back. As I looked back over the long path that had carried me from heartbreak to clarity, I realized how profoundly the year had reshaped me. What began as a wound carved open during a lonely birthday dinner had become the starting point of a transformation I never expected. The betrayal I endured did not define me. Instead, it opened a door I had been too afraid to approach, the door toward reclaiming my own life. The greatest lesson I learned was that boundaries are an expression of love, not cruelty. Setting limits with Adam had not been an act of punishment, but an act of protection for both of us. A mother's love can be deep enough to say no, firm enough to allow consequences, and brave enough to let a grown child stand on his own feet. I once believed that rescuing him was a form of love. Now I understood that stepping back was the truer offering. I also learned the power of independence, especially for women who have spent their lives placing others first. Taking control of my finances, understanding my accounts, and refusing to be pushed aside brought me a peace I had not realized I lacked. Standing in front of rooms full of women, guiding them through their own struggles, I discovered a confidence that had been waiting quietly for its turn. Forgiveness entered slowly, not as permission to forget, but as permission to move forward. Adam and Sophie were changing, growing, repairing the damage one step at a time. I did not owe them instant trust, and they did not expect it. What mattered was that none of us remained trapped in the past. Most of all, I learned that my worth was never determined by how others treated me, but by how I chose to rise after being hurt. Healing came from within, shaped by small acts of courage and the willingness to open my life to new meaning. As I sat by the window that evening, watching golden light spill across my living room, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The hardest boundary I ever set had become the doorway to my freedom. There are seasons in life when the ground shifts beneath our feet, forcing us to confront truths we once avoided. Yet it is often in those fractures that strength quietly grows. Boundaries, though difficult to set, become the lines that protect our peace. Forgiveness, though slow, becomes the bridge that allows us to walk forward without carrying what once harmed us. And healing, though never linear, becomes the quiet return to ourselves. In the end, the journey is not about what was lost, but about what was reclaimed. Dignity, clarity, and the courage to choose a life shaped by intention rather than fear. May this story serve as a reminder that it is never too late to rewrite your own narrative with honesty and grace. If this touched you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment, follow, and subscribe to stay connected with more stories that matter.